So we've started the recording, and I'd just like to take a moment to have everyone take a peek and make sure they're muted. If you're not speaking, if you could go ahead and make sure your microphone's on mute, that would be great. All right, so welcome to our regular February general meeting. This month, it's the meeting on affordable housing and homelessness in the Spokane area. My name is April May, and I am one of the members of the League Housing and Homelessness Committee here in Spokane. So I'd like to start out first by welcoming our new members that we have, our newest members in the League. We have Darla Osterman, Melissa Pitt, Marianne Torres, Fable Jens, and Elaine Sweet. So thank you and welcome. We appreciate having you as new members. And I'm going to take a minute to go to my reactions and give a little shout out for them. If you know how to work your reactions, go down to your reactions and give a little hello and tell them welcome. And if you have any questions as new members, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to post my email in the chat so that you'll have it and you can reach out if you have questions. All right, there you go. So this is our agenda for today. We're going to start out with Maurice Smith. He has a he's a documentarian, and he has a movie for us to watch on the night of the unsheltered homeless. Next, we have Judge Mary Logan from Community Court, Francis Adewale, the city attorney, and then Ben Stuckart with affordable housing will round out our group of prisoners today. At the end, we'll have time for Q&A, and then we'll go over some action items. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded land of the Spokane people, and that these lands were once the major trading center as they shared this place and welcomed other area tribes through their relations, history, trade, and ceremony. We also acknowledge that the land holds the spirit of the place through its knowledge, culture, and the original peoples since time immemorial. We ask that you recognize these injustices that forever change the lives of the Spokane people and all their relatives. We agree to work together to stop all acts of continued injustices towards Native Americans and all our relatives. It is time for reconciliation. We must act upon the truths and take actions that will create restorative justice for all people. The conversation we'll be having throughout this whole meeting ties into that spirit of taking action and restorative justice for the most vulnerable in our communities. And I'm so glad you're here to have this conversation with us. Thank you so much for coming. Now, I would like to introduce our local league president, Ann Murphy.
Thank you, April, and good morning. And I add my welcome to all of you at this general meeting, our members, and a variety of guests who have come to hear this dialogue. We're glad that you are here to be part of this, delving more into the crisis in our area, swirling around affordable housing and the unsheltered in our population. And thank you to those elected officials who are here as well for the dialogue. I commend our entire planning committee for their flexibility and diligence in bringing you today's program. And as to all great plans, life happens and changes had to be made. As you may already know, we regret that Governor Inslee will not be able to join us today as we had initially advertised. Governor Inslee instead is attending today's funeral for Officer Donald Sahota of the Vancouver Police Department, who was killed in a tragic incident in Vancouver last week. We ask for you to share a moment of silence. Thank you. And now I return you to April, who is the moderator for today's program. April.
The great unmute. There we go, I did it. Thank you for that, Anna. I appreciate it. All right. So now for a little housekeeping. We have set up a little chat that you can post your questions to. So if you were to click on the chat in your toolbar, you'll see that you have the option to chat, to post a chat to April, May, post questions here. So if throughout the course of our talk, you have questions for the presenters, go ahead and feel free to post those to me. And I will make sure and get those asked at the end of the presentations to our presenters. So now to begin, our first presenter will be Maurice Smith from the Rising River Media and Shalom Ministries. Thank you so much for coming today.
There we go. Thanks for having me. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
Now, were you going to show the clip that, did you have access to that link? If not, then I'll just dive into something else.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
It's getting...
We'll do that, and then I'll make a comment and get started.
This is the face of despair. It belongs to Shell. Up until a few minutes ago, Shell was parked by the Spokane River, living in his camper with his wife, Tanya, who has MS. But on this summer morning, Shell and Tanya were caught up in a police sweep of homeless camps. Their camper and truck were impounded, leaving Shell with no transportation, no place to live, and the despair of having the city legally take from him everything he owns. So how does it make you feel?
Totally lost.
Who benefits from such a policy? Certainly not our community. In the name of combating homelessness, the city just added 2 more people to Spokane's homeless population, and then ironically tells Shell he can go to a cooling center. This debacle is one of many living symbols of our city's broken homeless policy. A policy that simply does not work because it fails to acknowledge the size of the problem or to offer any practical solutions for people like Shell.
Mostly my concern with the police, with looking to the police to deal with homelessness, is that it won't work.
Welcome to the Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, a new documentary from Rising River Media that takes the viewer on a journey through homelessness in Spokane. Exposing a broken shelter system with beds for only half the known and counted homeless, a law enforcement policy of playing whack-a-mole with those experiencing homelessness, and a community discussion about our city's response to homelessness, what's working, what's not, and how we as a community can take a better path forward. We call it the Night of the Unsheltered Homeless.
All right, I'll just kind of go ahead and jump into things while you catch your breath. That trailer, by the way, for our documentary, The Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, was not my original plan. My editor, D.W. Clark, who did network production and editing for network affiliates up and down the West Coast for almost 40 years. When D.W. saw what we had filmed with Shell and that incident, he got livid and insisted that this is what people need to see that they don't want to see. And he and I kind of went back and forth, and finally I wrote the dialogue for it. He edited the video for it, and we produced this trailer. And the reason is because we believe that people need to see the reality of homelessness and homeless policy and how that policy impacts real people. And sometimes it is very painful to watch. That being said, I'm just going to kind of dive in. I'm a documentary filmmaker, but I want to start out by thanking the League of Women Voters of Spokane for taking a public interest in homelessness in our community and in the failures of our elected leaders to adequately provide for the needs of the homeless. I believe that meaningfully addressing homelessness in our community is going to require widespread community understanding and involvement. Education regarding homelessness is going to be key moving forward, which is why I make documentaries. As I said in my first documentary 3 years ago, and it remains true today, we can't change what we don't love, we can't love what we don't know, and we can't know what we're unwilling to invest with our time, our efforts, and resources. I also want to thank the organizers of today's meeting for sending out the link to our most recent documentary, The Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, in addition to airing on Community Minded TV, which is Comcast Channel 14. It's been viewed over 3,800 times on our YouTube channel, and if you haven't viewed it, let me encourage you to do so. And if you have, I'll be more than happy to field questions on it a little later. I've been working among the homeless and marginalized of our city for over 15 years. I'm a co-founder of Feed Spokane, a food rescue nonprofit. I served on the board of Truth Ministries Men's Shelter for many years, and I've operated or helped operate 4 low barrier shelters. I've also served on the organizing committee of the annual Spokane Homeless Connect for the past 4 years. And 3 years ago, I began making documentaries on homelessness in Spokane. And I've made 7 full-length documentaries in addition to several documentary short films, all of which you can see on our website at myroadleadshome.org. And also on our YouTube channel, which is My Road Leads Home. I've been asked today to talk about what's become one of the themes of our documentary work, namely the need to build the shalom of our community, and particularly of our homeless friends. And from the beginning of my documentary work on homelessness, one of my personal priorities has been to highlight the need to build shalom. That's the peace and welfare and well-being and healing of our community, and specifically our homeless community. The divisiveness and contentiousness of the current political environment, combined with the ongoing challenges of dealing with a pandemic, has made the task of shalom building both more difficult and more necessary than ever. If I had to speak to my motivation for this theme throughout my documentaries, I'd point to a verse from the Old Testament book of Jeremiah, which says, "Seek the welfare of the city, for in its welfare you'll find your welfare." And the word translated welfare is the Hebrew word shalom, usually translated peace. Shalom is really an old and deep Hebrew word that embodies a sense of wholeness, of welfare, of well-being, restoration, and peace. I think there's a deep and important message here. If you and I want shalom for ourselves and our own family, we have to seek it for others and for their families. If we want wholeness, welfare, health, well-being, and peace for ourselves, then we have to seek it for other people, including the homeless. Why? Because each of us is part of a community where our personal welfare is tied to the welfare of others. And for those experiencing homelessness, rebuilding broken shalom, restoring broken community, and healing personal trauma represent critical steps in their journey out of homelessness. And while shalom may have its roots in the faith community of ancient Israel and was brought into the early Christian community by Jesus when he declared, "Blessed are the peacemakers," in Aramaic, he literally said, "Blessed are the shalom makers." I've discovered that the message of shalom resonates with a wide spectrum of people and creates a bridge between both the secular and the religious. Why? Because we're both working to find our footing on the common ground of serving those in need. And I think at a very deep human level, we all possess some understanding of our need for shalom. In his book, Walking with the Poor, author Bryant Meyer applies the concept of shalom to the issue of poverty, defining poverty as the absence of shalom in all of its meaning. And building on Meyer's thought, if poverty represents the headwaters of homelessness in our community, then it's appropriate to say that homelessness too is a manifestation of the absence of shalom in all of its meaning. In an unpublished 2021 paper submitted to Multnomah Seminary doctoral student Marshawn Rogers suggests that when we look at the rhetoric of various social justice movements, quote, what you find is the desperate cry of broken people longing for shalom. Reflecting on these ideas, it's easy to see how the restorative nature of Shalom Building speaks to the needs of those mired in personal brokenness, poverty, and homelessness. The work of Shalom Building in the homeless community is the process of restoring to those experiencing homelessness an overall sense of wholeness in mind, body, and possession. This process of restoration will look differently for every individual. There are no cookie cutter solutions to poverty or homelessness. Joe Ader, Executive Director of Family Promise of Spokane, suggests there are two common denominators of homelessness: deep personal trauma and loss of community. If he's right, any restorative process that fails to address these issues in the life of the individual will ultimately fail in the long term. For many, this process may need to begin in a low barrier shelter that meets their immediate needs for food, sanitation, hygiene, and a safe bed, while providing them with an important first step towards stability. Others will need treatment for substance abuse, while others may be ready for a shelter operating recovery or job training programs with more requirements for participation and accountability. Genuine Shalom Building among the homeless recognizes and embraces this diversity of issues and needs as part of the process of restoration. And I'll just, as you can tell, I'm reading prepared remarks because it kind of saves time, but let me just make this statement. Having been at this 15 years, I believe that addressing homelessness is more than about just housing. It's about restoration of people at the most basic level of need. And if we fail to do that, housing won't solve the problem, because many of our homeless friends have had housing several times and lost it because they found housing, but they never found Shalom. So the inevitable question at this point is, where do we start in this whole Shalom stuff? Every meaningful journey into Shalom has to begin somewhere and requires something of a roadmap for where to go. And understanding that where we start is not going to be where we finish, I want to offer several Shalom Building steps that I call a homeless policy built on Shalom. Shalom Building step number one is rebuilding broken trust. Building Shalom together requires mutual trust, and right now, there's not a whole lot. We need to rebuild broken trust among regional policymakers, homeless service providers, and the homeless who spend their days and nights under bridges wondering if anybody cares. In a research study published in the year 2000, researcher Paul Dunn from Brock University discovered 3 factors for establishing trust. Number 1, frequent communication between the trustee and the trustor. Number 2, the competence of the trustee. Number 3, the trustee's previous behavior. Unfortunately, current homeless policy in Spokane lacks all 3 factors. First, regional policymakers don't communicate regularly with service providers other than a select few. We've got 1,500 people on the Spokane Homeless Coalition listserv. You can't talk to 12 people and think you've communicated with the homeless services community. Yeah. Second, service providers don't have confidence in the knowledge or expertise of regional policymakers regarding homelessness. And third, regional policymakers' previous behavior has been inconsistent, contradictory, and often outright damaging both to the homeless community and to the service providers who work with the homeless. Welcome to one of the most basic causes for broken Shalom, namely broken trust. Building Shalom together requires rebuilding mutual trust. Shalom building step number 2, practicing transparency. In addition to improved communication, which is critical, one important way we can begin to rebuild broken trust is by practicing openness and transparency. We could start with transparency regarding all raw data, homeless related data collected and used by policymakers and law enforcement. The raw data itself, the source of the data, how it was collected, and the intended use of that data. If I can't trust your data because you won't show me how you collected and compiled it, and when the spreadsheet you do release is riddled with errors that could have been easily avoided with simple transparency and open discussion, I can't support any policy or any shelter capacity report or any promised web-hosted dashboard based on that data. Regional policymakers need to practice transparency by making its data publicly available and inviting shelter operators and homeless service providers to cross-check, verify, correct, and ensure the integrity and accuracy of data being used in policy decisions. Buy-in, if you want policy buy-in from the homeless services community, that requires participation. Third, Shalom building step number 3, honest recognition concerning the size of the problem. As I said in the Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, one surefire way to not solve a problem is to underestimate its size and to build your plans accordingly. 2 years ago, in our documentary, The Hidden Homeless, Families Experiencing Homelessness, I took a fresh look at the number of those experiencing homelessness in Greater Spokane. The results we discovered were stunning, a three-year average of 11,541 people experiencing homelessness in Greater Spokane. While doing new research for the Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, my research team received a copy of a snapshot of homelessness in Washington State for July 2020, produced by the Washington State Department of Commerce. And according to this 2020 report, the number of individuals in Spokane County experiencing homelessness or housing instability was 13,240. That's 1,699 more than we found in 2019. If we're serious about meaningfully addressing homelessness and building the shalom of our community, it's imperative that we have a moment of honest recognition among all the participants that homelessness is a much larger issue in our community than any plan we have created to address it. Shalom building step number 4, sufficient shelter beds. I've served in the homeless community and the shelter community for over 15 years, including as a board member of 2 different shelter operators. I don't want to see anyone living in a homeless shelter. I believe the goal of every shelter operator in our city should be to work themselves out of a job. And personally, I look forward to the day when the last homeless shelter in our community closes its doors because it's no longer needed. That's my vision of a homeless policy that leads to shalom for everyone involved. Unfortunately, it's not today. As we clearly demonstrated in segment 2 of the Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, and was recently highlighted by the overflow crowd at the Convention Center warming shelter, we presently need 1, more shelter space and beds to accommodate the known and counted homeless. Number 2, sufficient low barrier shelter beds to accommodate the known encountered unsheltered homeless. And 3, appropriate beds for such issues as medical respite, mental health issues, addiction recovery, and personal safety. These shelter beds need to include qualified operators who understand trauma-informed care with marginalized and traumatized populations, regular healthy meals, showers and restroom facilities, secure storage for personal belongings, laundry facilities, on-site medical care, and access to a wide range of service providers to address their wide range of needs. Shalom building step number 5, ending law enforcement sweeps of the homeless. Law enforcement sweeps of the homeless from public spaces, bridges, parks, etc., are inherently problematic. Recent federal court decisions have ruled that such sweeps are illegal when there are insufficient low barrier beds to accommodate them. And such sweeps serve no useful long-term purpose and most often generate additional burdens and future barriers for the homeless in the form of citations for such things as impeding pedestrian traffic or third-degree possession of stolen property, i.e. a shopping cart. Municipal courts are overwhelmed with a flood of what are essentially frivolous citations that can result in fines and criminal records, thereby creating additional barriers to employment and housing. Code enforcement and law enforcement sweeps of the homeless represent a failed homeless policy. Sweeping homeless individuals from parks, camps, and bridges with no safe place for them to go, with them often returning before their citation paperwork is even been processed. Law enforcement sweeps of the homeless have become an endless cycle of rinse and repeat that underscores the rubric: we don't want to solve homelessness, we just don't want to see it. Any claim to victory from law enforcement sweeps of the homeless is both temporary and pyrrhic, coming at too great a cost to be worthwhile for the victim. Finally, Shalom building step 6, community-based solutions. The shalom of the community, specifically the homeless community, requires community involvement, including community-based and generated solutions that are not dependent on shifting political winds or on government employees who have no proven expertise in addressing homelessness. Community members ranging from concerned individuals to civic groups, churches, nonprofits, and businesses often have a genuine interest in addressing homelessness, along with fresh, even untried ideas to old challenges. The role of government isn't to solve homelessness, I think they've pretty well demonstrated, but to empower community members and nonprofits to creatively serve those in need and to build the shalom of the homeless in their larger community. Let me just give a couple of quick examples. Number one, last week, Jules Helping Hands, a nonprofit specializing in direct outreach to the homeless, opened a privately funded drop-in day and resource center for the homeless community. The homeless can shower, do laundry, get food, clean clothes, meet with service providers, use the computer lab to access online services, and just get off the streets for a while. What if we had one of those in every city council district in Spokane? Second, in the closing segment of our documentary, The Night of the Unsheltered Homeless, I featured the work of Mobile Loaves and Fishes, a faith-based nonprofit out of Austin, Texas. They've developed a project called Community First Village, a 178-acre community for those emerging from chronic homelessness. And it's helping formerly homeless individuals to rebuild community and to restore broken shalom. They believe that the single greatest cause of homelessness is the catastrophic loss of family or community. Founded in 2015, it began as a 27-acre planned community complete with a 100-space RV park, 130 microhomes, laundry, restroom, and shower facilities, a thriving community center, a community kitchen, job training and employment opportunities, and more. In April of 2021, Mobile Loaves and Fishes announced a major expansion to 178 acres, making space for an additional 1,400 microhomes, along with additional community amenities. Since then, they've received a $30 million grant from the Dell Foundation to fund and further develop the project. What if we started something similar on 25 acres outside of Spokane, with easy transportation and access to city services? As my own documentary work moves forward, I've been challenged by outside filmmakers to consider turning our work into a multi-episode series. If we're able to step up to that challenge, my plan is to address homelessness and related issues by highlighting an issue, telling the stories of those impacted by the issue, and then featuring individuals and organizations that are bringing creative solutions to address the issue and positively impact the lives of those experiencing it. It's time to be community-based solution oriented. We hope to do that through our documentary work moving forward. And I believe that is going to be one of the greatest solutions to homelessness in our community as we come together with community-based solutions. I'm going to stop there, and I think we're going to save questions and answers to the end, but I want everyone to know that I am an equal opportunity offender in my documentaries. My goal is to hold everyone's feet to the fire. I'm not an advocate for the city. I'm not an advocate for the county. I'm not an advocate for agencies. I'm a voice for people who don't have one. 20 years ago, my family and I were homeless. I lost everything. My wife and I had to go live with friends. My daughter had to live with her grandparents so she could stay at Shadle. My son had to drop out of Eastern. If it were not for friends and family who came around us, we would have been sleeping in our car in a park. I'm the voice for those who don't have. And I intend to do that until Jesus calls me home. Thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you so much for that, Maurice. I really appreciate you sharing. It's very touching, you sharing from your heart like that. And I really appreciate you being here. So we're gonna go ahead and save all of our questions till the end. I just wanted to let you know that I'm getting questions and I have them and they're not being ignored. So once we're done with all our presenters, we'll go ahead and I'll run through all your questions that you're posting to me. And thank you. So keep them coming. And then once we've gone through all our presenters, we'll go ahead and address the questions. And thanks again, Maurice. I appreciate you. Also, if you haven't yet watched Maurice's full video, we encourage you to check it out. It's a really good thing to watch. We'll post that link in the chat as well, so you'll have that. Oh, actually, Jennifer already posted it. She's on top of it. Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, so go ahead and check that whole thing out. All right, so next we have Judge Mary Logan and City Attorney Francis Adewale from the Spokane Community Court. Good morning, and I'm so glad you're here. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. And I think we have also a further complement of the team, which is Mr. David Kling from the City Prosecutor's Office, as well as Rick Wallace and Francis Adewale from the City Public Defender's Office, which is sort of the core root of what we rely on in community court. And before we talk about the specifics of community court, I thought it would be worthwhile to talk about how it is that we even landed in having a community court. And it's important to get a historical perspective. And usually I start this by, and it isn't a justification, it just seems to be the best way to launch into why we would want to do something different. In 2008, at the end of 2008, the city of Spokane made a decision about separating from contracting their judicial services to the district court, the county here. So they stood up the municipal court in 2009. I was one of 3 judges that was appointed by Mayor Werner, at that point in time was the mayor. And when we took on that role, myself, Judge Zamlin, and Judge Staub had the freedom, frankly, to create whatever court we thought was going to best or better match the needs of the city of Spokane, which was part of the complaint and why there was this disconnect with the county. For one thing, the population that we serve, our citizens, it is a different population than is served in the county. Probably the most diverse individuals live here in the city of Spokane, for one thing. And so with that, we felt we had the mantle of responsibility to create something new. And what I was going to say, the springboard of that is generally the definition of insanity, right? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that was not in our parlance. That was not what we wanted to go forward with. Part of the discussion was just sort of beginning to reach out within internally what we could do to approach the criminal justice system in the city differently. And that was just having an open conversation, frankly, with our probation department, because I was very aware that there were many resources that were available that simply were not being tapped into. So the insanity that I'm talking about at misdemeanor level really is the application of a short-term jail sentence with either no terms or terms that are impossible to meet by an individual because nobody has assessed what their needs are or their ability to even satisfy those conditions. So that starts that revolving door of justice people talk about. Frankly, the police captain that we began community court with, her reference was the gerbil wheel, because it's just this constant churning in and out and in and out and in and out without changing anything. It's based upon, frankly, a punitive retribution model, with the thinking being that if you just make it, if you can put them in jail, that somehow that's going to change things and bring them around the folks that are involved in the criminal justice system to a different way of life. So, and I'm hopeful that Mr. Adewale and probably Mr. Wallace can easily address this, as well as Mr. Kling, which is seeing not only initially individuals that are brought into the system, but then those individuals' family members. So from father to son to grandchild or grandmother and granddaughter, because nothing has changed by the fact that we've applied a sanction for misconduct, for a violation of the law. So in seeking out alternatives, first it was using an alternative to jail, even just the use of electronic home monitoring or day reporting as opposed to jail. And understand a component, while this is not supposed to be in the front load of a judge's mind, is how much I'm spending each day on a jail sentence. I consider it because I know, for example, that between $25 and $40 a day is the expense for inpatient treatment. $130 is spent to put them in jail. So that's something to consider. It isn't a compelling decision point, but it's certainly something that needs to be a part of the consideration if you're really trying to change behavior. So in 2010, because of research that I had done and by direction from my chief probation officer at the time, I came across a nationally recognized entity known as the Center for Court Innovation. And in 2010, they were offering up their first international community court convention. International. That was mind-blowing to me just to begin with, that we weren't just talking about the nation, but worldwide as participants in this. And of all of the locations that I could imagine it to be held, I did not think it would be held in South Dallas, Texas, which was being heralded as a primary example of this really incredible, innovative fashion of dealing with low-level, what had been defined at the time as quality of life crimes. And that definition is really not as it impacts not only the public, but as the individual, that it is as a component of how they are interacting on a day-to-day basis. So I went down to South Dallas, Texas, and I had my mind blown. They didn't have just one community court, they had 5 community courts. Their city council members were so supportive of what was going on there because they could see the effect it was having on their constituents, on the individuals that lived there, on the day-to-day existence of everybody was being benefited by this. So I'll lay it out for you so that you understand why it is that when we came back here, we created the footprint that we did. The community court that I attended in South Dallas, Texas, was in a courtroom that was maybe, if you could think about it, maybe 2 to 3 closet spaces, very, very small. And off of that room was 2 other rooms. One was for social service provider, a navigator for that, and the other was a community service navigator. And then that double, triple wide closet space was in a U-shaped community center that was named the Martin Luther King Community Center. And that community center was one of the most robust community centers I have ever seen in my life. Everything from federal resources, certainly state and local resources, anything from housing to identification, to treatment, to DOC, I can't even tell you the number of resources. Treatment providers were there, food providers were there, housing providers were there, so that the individual that was brought into community court on these nonviolent crimes would then be immediately connected without the need for public transport, without the need of any physical barriers to them having access to these services. So I was there, I think it was, 4 or 5 days, came back to Spokane and was like, if they can do it in South Dallas, Texas, by God, we can do it here in Spokane. We didn't have the benefit of that completely robust community center. So it was a matter of figuring out how we can create that here in the city of Spokane. And what I learned right away, because I made a mistake, is that I was so certain that, for example, the public defenders would just buy right onto this. How could they not? How could they not want to? Well, of course they wanted to, but I didn't include them in the conversation right away. And that was a mistake. So it took us a little while to get up to speed where there was indeed a true collaboration, not just with the attorneys, because it had to then reach out to the community itself. And I did catch a little bit of what Maurice was talking about, and the emphasis on community is so important, because this isn't something that can stand alone, and it can't be just some enthusiastic judge coming forward with this great idea. It has to be buy-in by everybody. So when it started to take root a little bit, at least again with the internal components, right? The attorneys really had to be on board. Prosecution had community policing, community prosecution in their background. So it wasn't nearly as a foreign topic as it appeared to be for defense. Once defense was included in the conversation about how it would be that we would approach the participants that were going to be the components, the working individuals in our court, we had to make sure that we had the community on board. Next step was to go to the police department. At that point in time, we had Chief Straub as our chief of police. And so I thought I was approaching him with something that was so brand new. And, he had a wry smile when I asked him about the participation of police, because he said, I came from White Plains, New York. We've been doing this. You tell me what you need and we will be there. And frankly, that has been the relationship that we have had with the police department, because they could see the significant change. And let me tell you why that was so important. For them, it was meeting somebody out on the street under a bridge where they had told them, you cannot be here and you must move on. And instead of immediately citing them, which they did not, they would come back the next day and they would then have to cite them. And they might even ultimately have to arrest them. And then they would bring them across the bridge to the jail, where again, we have a contractual relationship with the jail. And they would go down in the Sally Port, deposited them there. And by the time that they had made their way back out again to type up their report, that individual had been booked and released, and guess where they were heading? Exactly back to the same spot. So they could see the wisdom of this. And it was at the same time where the precinct option for police was brought into play. So we developed a working relationship with the downtown police department. We also had to work with the Downtown Spokane Business Association, because you cannot deny a city whose main source of income is based upon what happens in those businesses, the impact of having somebody sleep in their doorstep, not only on the individual that's sleeping in the doorstep, the circumstances that they are in, but then how the collateral consequences of that. So all of these moving parts began to gel when we finally landed into where we would be holding court, which was at the downtown library. And our first conversation was with Andrew Chance, approaching him. And ultimately he agreed that we would indeed join them at the library. He was not going to initially until the conversation that we held with him, because he saw for him that this library was something more than books on a shelf. It was indeed a resource center, which is what Community Court ultimately was putting together in an effort to try to apply a different form of pressure, which is removing barriers and allowing easy access. So we invited 100 resource providers to come to an explanation of what we were doing and ask them to agree with what we were doing so that they would commit to come there instead. Their concern was that they were going to be inundated with new people. But again, savvily, my probation officer said, this is the same population you're already serving. But instead of expecting someone that doesn't have the ability to drive themselves to an appointment to you, you will be in the room and we will send them to that next room where you would then have readily easy access to the population that we are serving. So why does community court work, and does it? We were studied by Washington State University after about 2 years, because that's usually what you need, at least 2 years of work in the field in order to get some kind of baseline data. What we've demonstrated is there's a 15% difference between those individuals that make their way through a traditional court and those that make their way through community court of not re-offending, of getting connected to services that will help them. And so that's a good thing. And 15% sounds small, but it is not. When you think of the exponential contacts of individuals in the community and how they make their way through the system. We have become a mentor court because of the model in the library, where again, it is low barrier access to as many services as we can provide, and who are willing to participate with us. COVID has changed things considerably for everybody, as we know. The contacts, it has been shut down for a couple of weeks, but we stood back up again. That is, the entirety of municipal court stood back up again, including community court, because at no time even greater than in this time period where resources are so difficult to access, did we need to be there to help fill in, to help people get connected. So we have been continuing to run the resource providers. We've been able to get support from the state to get phones and to get pads so that we can Zoom appointments and keep people safe and keep people healthy while still connecting them to those services that still exist out there. I'm going to hand it off to Francis or to Dave Kling so that they can fill in some of the other components of what we do and why it is important that community court continue on as it is. Francis? Thank you,
Yono. Thank you. We're grateful for the opportunity to be able to talk here today. We appreciate all the help that the community gives us to be able to do this work. The history that Judge Logan set out is important because sometimes we forget how we got to where we are. And sometimes we take it for granted that these programs will always exist because it's always been. It didn't come out of the blues. It comes from an intentional act. And there are two things that I want us to understand about community court and its place in our city. That is the conflict between the business owners in downtown who have that challenge of homeless people being in and around their business and stopping them from being able to continue their work. I mean, to be able to have patrons come in to the restaurant, to the businesses, without having to deal with people peeing in their flower pot and things like that. Then there is also the other concerns that people raised about the fact that most of our transitional shelters are located right there in the downtown core. Why is that? Because most of our neighborhood refused to allow us to have transitional shelter, whether in the South Hill or in the North Side or in the East or in the West, even in the Spokane Valley. So people said, not in my backyard. So we don't have a choice. We have to locate a transitional shelter right there in the downtown where all the businesses are. So there is always bound to be conflict. But this conflict is not meant to be resolved by the criminal justice system, because the people that are being charged into court, like Maurice said, they are not violent criminals. They are being charged with trespass. They are actually the victims of the crime for which they are being charged of. Because if we have taken the homeless crisis out of the political calculation and we don't use it as a campaign opportunities to gain on the other people, we would actually be able to have a policy that address the problem without having to worry about what is going to happen at the next election. So that is how we ended up, that this issue ended up on the lap of the court. And community court has tried as much as possible to address this in a way in which the people that were being sent out of the circle of human concerns, the homeless people themselves, are the issue, are the focus. What they need to be in a better place, what services they require to be in a better place, are the ones that we are bringing to them in an environment in which they are participants in the work. What has really helped us in the last 7 to 8 years is being able to let them understand that the stake of this city belongs to them just as it belongs to the rich person in this city. So one of the things that the League of Women Voters did for us that remains indelible in our memory is to be able to come down to the library when we were still open and register people to vote. I need to tell you how much that meant to people. When we begin to register homeless people to vote, one of my participants brought in his voter's card. He said, "Francis, you mean I too can vote? You mean this make a difference? I can make a difference on who is going to be the mayor?" Being able to enable people to see that there is a value to their lives is what we are trying to do in community court. And it's not a punitive process, but there is also going to be, because it's accountability with help. We can provide you all these services. If you reject it and you don't care about how to get your life together, we would always insist that you do community service, you give back to the community where these crimes are committed, because it's still a crime under the book. And I tell people, my friends like Maurice and the Homeless Coalition, if you don't want the community, if you don't want the justice system to be involved in the prosecutions of this crime, take the crimes off the book. But as long as the crime is on the book, I am not a legislator, I'm not a politician. I'm here to just ensure that my clients are safe and secured and they don't have to deal with the same charges over and over again. Judge Logan has an experience in court this week that I told her she needs to talk about. And hopefully when Dave is finished, and Judge Logan will be able to talk about that experience, because you can contrast the two court systems, the community court and the traditional courts. So Dave, Kling, over to you.
Thanks, Francis. And I can't agree with Francis anymore, which is something early in my career would have seemed strange, but it's a collaborative court. When people are cited in the community court, it's an opt-in court. So they're fully represented by the public defense. If they see some sort of challenge that they want to make on the case or take it to trial, they have every right to do that. And so that's kind of a misconception out there that people are forced into this court. I think of it as an opportunity where they're most likely, hopefully, going to have some positive benefit after they've gone through the process. We work as a team with all the providers. One thing we've changed since COVID is we've gone virtual on our staffings that we used to do right before the court hearings at the library. So once a week, we have an hour to an hour and a half on Zoom with as many as 50 or 60 service providers, fire department, police, just trying to case manage as much as we can, people that need the most help. As Francis said, these are, most of these charges have been on the books for a while. Before community court, they were just sent to the other court, and you would end up with people spending time in jail for the same offenses. And at least here, there's an opportunity to give back through the community service, to possibly receive assistance with if there's a substance use or mental health issue or housing issue. We at least have access to the resources, and we can try to connect the dots for people, so they're not just responsible for having to go over to the traditional courthouse, leave court with a piece of paper and try to figure out how they're going to get it all done. It's not realistic, and when they fail, usually they'll end up in jail. So I think we take great pride in what we do. We're at the center of a lot of publicity on homelessness in the community, which is a very important issue that needs to be improved, clearly. I think everybody here has an interest in that, but we appreciate any support that people have. If people want to come down and see what we're doing in court, you're always welcome. We can kind of explain the process. One other thing about the process is when people come to court for the first time, they're greeted by a volunteer, and they undertake a needs assessment to kind of identify what's going on and what would help. And that shapes the resolution that we have, which typically is about 4 weeks, 3 months, or 6 months, depending on the needs. And so it's all evidence-based practices that lead us to kind of the resolution on the case. And ultimately, we don't want to see some sort of sanction, and sanctions aren't super common, but if there's an appropriate circumstance, sometimes it's needed. But thank you for having us here today. And if there's any questions later on, I'd be happy to answer.
Well, I'll step in here. There's one thing that I wanted to also highlight about what Mr. Adewale mentioned is the 2 points in terms of the transitional shelters being close to downtown. The other component is that the vast majority of the services that are available are located downtown. And so anytime housing is put up, the concept is to have it on a bus line so that there's easier access to the services, because again, the population that we're serving has the greatest need. When it comes to an analysis of risk and need, that they are absolutely at one of the higher marks, struggling with mental health issues, struggling with substance abuse issues. And it's not because of a matter of choice that this is some sort of entertainment in terms of the addiction, but often we are dealing with individuals that also have the highest trauma. They are we'll call them graduates of the foster care system, where they had not been adopted. They have that disconnection from community that, again, Maurice has so eloquently spoken about in the past. And one of the individuals this individual that came before me yesterday in my court across the river in traditional court, he had been a participant in the past. We had recognized that there were mental health needs for him. And the depth of that need, I think, became more apparent over time for him. He eventually he did not make his way through community court, and he began to opt out, but didn't stop his activities downtown where he had been trespassed in a number of locations. He was before me yesterday on a charge of malicious mischief and trespass in the 2nd degree, I believe it was. He was found defecating in a stairwell at a business that he had been, actually, I think it was at one of the churches where he had been trespassed from other bad behavior. He probably was 30 pounds lighter than I've ever seen him, and I've known this individual for years now. And he said to me that he did not want to be represented by an attorney because he knew that on the malicious mischief that the longest that I could keep him in jail for was a year, and he welcomed that. He wanted me to put him in jail for a year. This is a simple misdemeanor. This is not a felony. There was no person that was harmed by this man's conduct. That is no direct victim of the activity. Was there harm to the place where he is at? I'm not diminishing that. Nobody wants to clean up after that's happened. But to say that that activity in his mind, he was willing to accept a year in jail for was frankly for me soul crushing. I went through a colloquy with him. He certainly understood all of what he was giving up in this process by not being represented. I stepped out of the room. He had a conversation with the prosecutor, who instead offered him 60 days in jail, which he was more than happy to accept. She dismissed one of the charges. He pled on one of the charges. But again, at the end of 60 days, and I had this conversation with him, what happens to you at the end of 60 days? What have we done to change what's going on for you at the end of 60 days? And he said, nothing, but at least winter will be over. So it won't be so hard for me to be out on the street. He got his 60 days. I absolutely followed what he had agreed with the prosecutor. But what could have happened instead? So 60 days at $130. And again, it's not because of the price tag. It's just how could we better spend that money? Because we are spending that money at $130 a day, $7,800 to house him in the county jail. So when I think about, that's all very much a bummer, right? That's a big, heavy, wet wool blanket. What could be done better? If it's possible to have a housing structure that includes the service providers, like who could meet you at the front door? Could there be a navigator at the front door? Oh, hi, Chris. So did you make it to your appointment today? You have one tomorrow. Our store is open today. Can we get you some fresh food for your meal today? Something that will help him, because I can tell you that the individual that is sitting in the county jail right now for the next 59 days needs that kind of help. The participants that are coming into community court need that kind of help. They are not capable of handling it on their own without assistance. So the concept of permanent supported housing really needs to be a part of what we can use as a resource. That is what community court can use as a resource, because we can absolutely have them be compliant with, involvement with treatment and involvement with getting their social security and getting their ID and getting their food card. But if at the end of that day, where all of that has happened, and the only other place they have to go is a shelter that is a bedroll on the floor someplace where they have been beaten up, had their things stolen from them. We hear it. I mean, I am the voice of what they are telling me what happens to them. Then they're not going to go there, and they're going to go back under the bridge. And in order to cope with the terror and the trauma that they have, they're going to resort back to using again, defeating everything that has been applied to them. So how do we all help in that? Is by having some other plan that isn't 2 weeks in the winter and 2 weeks in the summer. 2 weeks we have a shelter when it's bitter cold, and 2 weeks in the summer we have a shelter when it's steamingly hot. So the frustration I have from the bench is I want to have as many resources that I can apply to somebody, because what you all expect me to do is fix them. They come into the criminal justice system and I am expected to fix them. We're the last vestige before the only thing we do is then we facilitate what they want by sticking them in the jail. And if there are other resources available, if there are more connections, lower barrier, greater access, then we have a shot at it. Then I can help be a part of the solution of fixing. And I don't mean that just me personally, but I mean that as the criminal justice system, because frankly, every other system has failed them up to that point in time, that they're now in the system with me. And I would rather not have them. I would rather not so well know the individuals that come before me as I knew the individual that came before me yesterday. So I appreciate you being willing to listen to what we have to say, because that's it. Well, community court's not holding them accountable. We do hold them accountable. We make them work harder than I can make anybody work by just giving them a 60-day sentence where they sit 3 huts in a cot, right? That's the awful colloquialism that's applied to what's happening. But I'm not making them work to get their lives back. And I would frankly rather that energy be placed there. That's a better source. That's a better use of my skills. It's a better use of prosecution skills, of defense skills, and all the resource providers that we have access to. Is if the more resources that we have on a long-term basis, then the greater success that we might have.
Thank you so much for that, Judge Logan. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And I want to remind everybody right now that we are taking questions in the chat. If you go to the chat and you look for my name, April May, post your questions here. I'm getting a lot of really great questions that we're going to address at the end of this talk. And so I want to thank you, Judge Mary Logan, Francis, and David for coming and speaking to our group today. I really appreciate all your thoughts. And we have lots of questions for you at the end, so hang in there. So, all right, so our next speaker for today, we have Ben Stuckart, the Executive Director of Spokane Low Income Housing Consortium.
Hi, everybody. I'm the director at the Low Income Housing Consortium, but I'm also the board chair for the Spokane Regional Continuum of Care, which is the regional board in charge of $4.3 million in annual HUD money for homelessness prevention. Real quick before I start, I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting. Also, Judge Logan gave a great transition into low income housing, I think, in her work and all her work on the community court. Thank you to Francis and David, and thank you to Maurice for all your work, Maurice, out in the community. I'm just going to start by saying homelessness and housing are inextricably tied together. I'm a big believer in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is that until you have your basic needs met, whether that's a roof over your head or food, it's going to be really hard to get your higher needs met. And that's, as Judge Logan said, the longer term solution. You can't just rely on the short term, because we can argue all we want in our community about how much shelter space or how many warming centers we need. But the long-term solution is right now there's not enough housing to get people from shelters into permanent supportive housing or other low-income housing or market rate housing. We can argue all that we want as a community about mental health services and addiction, but therapy and treatment don't work if you receive those services and end up back on the streets or in a shelter with another 150 folks on mats. In order for services to work, you need housing and your basic needs met. And we can argue all you want about accountability, but if you put up barriers in order to receive housing, you will end up right where we are at now, which is people on the streets or in jail or building more temporary short-term shelters that do nothing to solve the long-term problem. We can all agree that every individual has their own story, has unique circumstances and needs, and services that are tailored to their situation. But what is not unique about homelessness is that they're homeless without a home, without housing. So housing is a really big, huge, complicated issue. So I'm going to give some terms and then I'll finish off with maybe what things, if you're interested, that we can do to help. So housing can be divided into 3 areas: market rate ownership, think houses, condos, townhomes; market rate rentals, rental homes, rental apartments, duplexes, triplexes; and low income housing, either subsidized rent or subsidy to build it so that the rents can be artificially low. They're all important and part of the same system. We have homeless programs that are funded through the continuum of care that rely solely on market rate apartments, not low income apartments. So we need housing at all levels. We have apartments that would normally people could go and buy, and they would vacate those apartments maybe when they stabilized in their work or were in their 30s, but they're staying in apartments because there are no houses to buy. We have a crisis at all three levels of housing in Spokane. Ownership, there's been an over 30% increase in the cost to buy a home over the last 18 months. That's in the top 10 worst markets in the country. Rentals, over a 30% increase in the last 18 months in people's rent. That's in the top 10 worst markets in the country. We have a low income supply problem. There is a 3-year wait list if you do everything right now in Spokane in order to get into permanent supportive housing or other subsidized housing. That's 3 years if you're doing everything right. Everything's possibly right. A lack of supply, basic economics, causes all of these cost increases and shortages. We do not have enough homes to own. We do not have enough apartments to rent, and we do not have enough low-income housing. So sometimes helpful to look back and ask why we have a shortage and long-term homelessness is increasing and why we have a housing crisis. In the 1970s, the federal government cut low-income housing subsidy to build housing by 75%. That has never been made up. When Spokane built Expo 74, which we all point out as this great community project, we tore down over 30% of the low-income housing stock in the city of Spokane. That has never been made up. Spokane is built like a giant suburbia with giant suburban code that does very little to densify our city and have more apartments. In 1992, Washington State passed the Growth Management Act and restricted outward growth, but forgot that NIMBYs are powerful and won't allow density. So you cannot go out and you cannot go up in Spokane. That is artificial scarcity caused by unintended consequences of our policies. Spokane has one of the strongest neighborhood council systems in the United States. It's in our city charter. But those neighborhood councils are made up of the same NIMBYs and control your local politics. They are the loudest voices in the city of Spokane, but they want their neighborhoods to stay exactly the same, which means no more housing, no more apartments, no more low-income housing, and they don't want duplexes where they have single-family homes. And in the 1980s, the United States saw deinstitutionalization of folks in mental institutions. Those might have been bad, but we never fully properly funded nor implemented community mental health. Doesn't exist now. Those people end up in our jails. If you go to our current Spokane County jail and take a tour, the 3rd floor, you walk off the elevator. That's a mental institution. That is not a jail. There's so much more, but I want to finish with some of the things we can do right now to address our housing shortage and get people off the streets and make it so your sons and daughters can afford to buy a home in Spokane. Locally, the city and the county have $181 million in ARPA funds. They had half of this money since March of 2021, and not a dime has gone out to the door to the community. The city allocated $14 million in January, but it has still not been put out for requests for proposals. So that is $181 million. Email all of your elected officials at the city and the county and ask them to spend as much of the $181 million on low-income housing and homeless solutions, and get the money into paying for solutions now. If we have a crisis in housing, we have people on the streets. Last year, we had 162 people die on the streets of Spokane. The last year I know of the statistics for it was in the 90s. That's a 50% increase in 1 year of people dying on the streets. Those are our community members. We all live in the same community, but we have money in the bank that could be taking care of those people, and we could do something about it. If all 76 people on this call emailed this afternoon, your elected officials would hear you. Locally, ask the city council and the mayor of the city of Spokane to get House Bill 1590 out the door. 2020, many hundreds of people spent passing the local housing levy. It started collecting dollars on July 1st of 2021. There is $4 million in the city's bank right now, and ask them to get that money out to build more housing so we can get people off the street. Third, in 2021, staffing was short in the CHHS department. They were down to 40% of the employees in the city of Spokane. What that meant was the federal home dollars, which is about $2 million for low-income housing. It's the largest source of money for local agencies to build low-income housing. The city couldn't get it out the door. That is sitting in the city's bank account right now. That's 2021 home dollars, $2 million. The county got their allocations out the door and is building housing with it right now. Contact your elected leaders at the city and ask for the 2021 home dollars to be released. Advocate for density in your neighborhood at neighborhood council meetings and with our planning commission. And statewide, advocate with legislators from both the 4th, the 6th, and the 3rd district to spend $500 million of the $1 billion in state of Washington ARPA funds on low-income housing and homelessness. They are writing the budgets, and appropriations is meeting now. There is a huge statewide movement to spend at least half of that, $500 million, on these solutions so that we can build more housing and help get people off the streets. I also like the following legislation if you're into advocating for specific bills. House Bill 1337 is ADU reform. We could all build little tiny homes in our backyard, but cities, because of NIMBYs, have restrictive regulatory frameworks. The state will come and override that. We need ADU regulatory reform so that we have more places for people to live in our city. The next one is the middle housing bill, which allows density in single family neighborhoods. That's House Bill 1782. 1782 allows duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in larger cities in our single family zones. That's important for racial equity just as much as it is to increase housing. If you look at our single family zones, if you don't know the history of single family zones, just real quick, 1916, the city of Berkeley passed a law that said they didn't want a Black-owned business in their town. The state Supreme Court of California said that is racist and you can't have it. So what did the city of Berkeley do? The next week, they created, out of nothing, single family zoning because they knew that only white folks owned housing. Single family zoning has its historical basis in racism in the United States. And if you look at the red line maps in Spokane from 1932 and compare that to where our single family zones are now and where wealth is concentrated, they all match and overlay on top of each other. We should be attacking single family zoning and allow the missing middle housing to be allowed. And finally, House Bill 1866, which is Apple Health and Homes Bill, which former Speaker Chop is championing, allows mental health and treatment specialists to prescribe housing and then puts the $500 million in ARPA funds towards building more housing. This moves us towards housing with services inside the housing, just like Judge Logan was talking about, as a permanent state budget line. And just to finish, as a society, we've created a system where those with homes have a vested interest in seeing their home values increase. There are very few pensions left and wages are not rising fast enough to pay for retirement. So wealth creation happens for most of us when we purchase a home. So we have a personal interest in seeing our value rise. So the problem this creates is a crisis for everybody else. No one new can afford a home, rents rise, and there is no low-income housing. Thus, your value rises while more people end up on the streets. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you so much for that. That was some excellent information. We will definitely follow up on those specifics as well with our with everyone here today after this. So now what we'd like to do is I have a lot of questions from everyone in the audience. So we'd like to have Ben, Maurice, Judge Logan, Francis, David. We'd like to have all of you guys, if you don't mind, answer the questions that we have here. So I'm going to start with the first one that came in was from Carolyn. Carolyn, hopefully I don't butcher this too bad. Patek.
Pettick.
Question. Oh, go ahead.
Pettick.
Pettick. Thank you for that. Her question is there a way we can place an ownership limit on rental properties or increase the taxes on rental ownership that exceeds a certain number of properties?
we could at least start with a rental registry and business registration for those so that we could make sure that those rental properties are able to be inspected and people have decent living conditions. I think there is some, there's worry that creating like a rental cap would hurt the market when we have a lot of people, landlords getting out of the rental market right now, and we don't have enough apartments. And so setting rental rates, I think there's a lot of easier things we could do right away, which we should be inspecting rentals. They should be a business just like everybody else. And there should be a registry so we even know where those are located. I think a cap sometimes backfires and creates problems. Other cities that have created rental caps before are areas like Manhattan and San Francisco, and it did not control their housing crisis at all.
Okay. So next from Christine Clark, I have living in North Spokane County. I know that Elk, Washington, unincorporated, has a shortage of affordable housing for limited income families. How do we as county residents work together for those living in our county in need of appropriate shelter?
Anybody else want to jump in? I'll jump in. I think in the unincorporated areas, they need to be in contact with the county commissioners who have ARPA funds and advocate for low-income housing outside of the city of Spokane and outside of Spokane Valley. I think they need to, I know there's a great church network up there north that has a great drop-in place. I think they need to work with them. That drop-in center about right up by where Cattails, a little past Cattails, that drop-in center, their board of directors is very interested in building some low-income housing out there or finding other solutions. They could contact me at benstuckart@gmail.com and I can give them the information. But I think there's a huge need, and I think a lot of this problem points to scarce resources being, and then there's competition for resources. So if the need is higher in downtown Spokane, you're going to see more low-income housing being built there. And, you know, Spokane County only gets one tax credit project, which is really the most powerful tool we have to build low-income housing, but our county only gets one a year. So if the need is higher in downtown Spokane, you're going to have a 50-unit tax credit project built down there instead of the county. And a lot of this does come down to, we're not putting, you know, I talked about in the 1970s, we cut 75% of the federal subsidy from building low-income housing, and that's never been made up. So you create scarcity for these resources, and then you end up with pockets of our community that are the needs not being met.
Thank you. Next is Eric Robinson. Do we know how many housing units in Spokane County are short-term rentals, like Airbnb, for example? And any ideas about how to incentivize these units to be used to address our housing crisis, rather than as income sources for those with capital to invest?
The city of Spokane does have a law in the books that short-term rentals are supposed to register, but my understanding is only about 15% of them have registered, and nobody's ever allocated the resources. There should be, just like there should be somebody assigned to a rental registration, there should be somebody assigned to short-term rentals. I've been in meetings where it's mentioned that you should just ban short-term rentals because that's taking rental stock off the market, and if that's always met with derision and laughter, but it's actually a good solution. I don't think that if you have a housing crisis, using them as short-term rentals, especially when 5 years ago we overbuilt on hotels in Spokane that are now sitting at 50% vacant. Why wouldn't you want those hotels to survive, get rid of the short-term rentals, and have more rental stock?
And then Jennifer Montgomery had a follow-up regarding something. This was similar. Is the city and our county doing anything about the vacant ghost houses throughout our area? It certainly appears that a meaningful match between repaired, retrofitted houses and the unsheltered population would make sense.
The number has gone down by 50% over the last 6 years. There are some people actually in the prosecutor's office working really hard on this issue in the city attorney's office, and they're making great progress, one house at a time. It's really complicated. There's also a great study that the city did recently on a land bank, and there's a couple little tweaks to state law that need to be made. But I think you'll see over the next 12 to 24 months that there'll be a process to use those directly for low-income housing. I need to be quiet, and Judge Logan, and Francis, and Maurice. I'm going to mute
Okay.
myself so I don't answer any more questions.
Well, okay, so I've got this question. How is the Public Defender's Office funded? And how much autonomy does the PD have? Who or what entity oversees the public defenders?
I think I can answer that question. Ben can answer that question. The Public Defender's Office is funded by the city. We have two public defender offices in our county. One in the city of Spokane, the other one with the county of Spokane. There is also a council for defense that take conflict cases from the county. These offices are directly funded by the city for the city public defender's office and by the county for the county public defender's office. There are two counties in the nation, or three, that have elected public defenders. In other words, to insulate the public defender's offices from the city attorney's office, from the county legal department, so that they are in.
I think,
Francis, you froze.
is he frozen? Okay.
He's
that's what I was
frozen.
thinking.
He can jump in when he's unfrozen. That is not the situation here in the city of Spokane. There's not an elected, they're appointed. And in fact, they answer to the city administrator. So Johnny Perkins is the current.
Independent in the way they manage their cases, that they are not controlled.
So Francis, you were frozen and we weren't able to hear you. I think he dropped off now. Okay.
The idea of it, of course, is that the city defender's office and the county defender's office are autonomous and not subject to political whimsy. Because when you're talking about individuals' constitutional rights, and of course, then the consequences of criminal charges, there is not supposed to be exterior pressure on how cases are dealt with.
We do have in San Francisco as well as in Florida, there are elected public defenders, directors of program, where people directly elect the public defender to insulate them from the politics, from the day-to-day politics by the county or the city. Sorry, April, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you're back. Welcome back. So I do have a question posted here just for Judge Mary Logan from Liera. I'm sorry if I didn't say that right. Her question is, have you seen an increase related to charges, cases in court related to homeless sweeps and data available for multiple charges when folks have had nowhere to go? And possibly we'll have Maurice piggyback on that once you're done with your.
I have to say that when those sweeps take place, generally, I know this, they're given 48 or 72 hours to clear out, and they clear them out. They aren't necessarily being charged unless they don't move on, in which case then there might be trespass charges that are filed against them. But I would not say that we see these, when that happens, we don't see a large number of cases. But I would ask Mr. Kling in the prosecutor's office because they certainly go there first. That is, the charges come through the prosecutor's office first, but I haven't seen that to be the case.
I haven't noticed too much of a specific increase. Obviously, if there's emphasis at certain times, then there will be a cluster of cases at once. But obviously, it tapered off as most things did at the beginning of COVID when people were locked down. Off the top of my head, which is probably dangerous, I'd say it's probably less new citations now than right before the pandemic, though. So I'd say it's pretty consistent. I don't know, Francis or Rick, what numbers you're seeing every week.
Rick can take that.
Yeah, I don't think we're seeing an uptick in cases at this point, and haven't for a couple of years. When they do the emphasis, they're trying to do an educational component with that, and they're not trying to cite people. So they're trying to give them notice, get an opportunity to leave, and give them brochures for community court, because people can access services here without having criminal charges pending. So that's the goal. And we don't typically see a big chunk of cases from those sweeps.
And that is important to note, because the way we started in community court, which is still the process, is that when an officer meets someone that is committing these quality of life crimes, in other words, crimes that more or less are homeless focused crime, trespass, pedestrian interference, and all of that type of charges, the intention which the precinct, the downtown precinct and the precinct we work with accepted and buy into, is that they will give them a flyer. If you will go to community court to get services, then I won't need to cite you. I won't need to give you a ticket. I won't need to charge you for this crime. And when we started the community court, we actually have almost 75% attendance coming in to access services, and not because they've been given a ticket. So that is a fundamental shift, that the reason for that is because the officers that work in downtown precinct and in all of these precincts that we work with, they buy into that philosophy that is not to charge first. This is different from the patrol team, though. But the downtown precinct officers get this. They will give opportunity to people over and over again to be able to come and access services. It's only after they have tried that approach that they finally cited them and said, you go down to community court on Tuesday at City Hall. That is the process. And I believe that that's still the process we follow. But, people do have constitutional rights. So that makes a difference.
And I'd also like to hear we have a question in here for Maurice regarding what he's seen in regards to sweeping and what he sees. So Maurice, do you mind addressing if there's other options or what your thoughts are on that?
We dedicated a segment of our last documentary, The Night of the Unsheltered Homeless. We dedicated segment 3, and it's called Sweeps and Collateral Damage. And in that segment, we did extensive interviews with people who've been swept. But I think part of the heart of that segment was an interview with Andrew Biviano, who's a civil rights attorney here in the city. And his first statement when we sat down and began filming the interview just kind of nailed me. And he said that our country, not just our city, but our nation, has an unfortunate history of using the police power of the state to rid itself of undesirables. And then he commented on sometimes those are sexual undesirables, sometimes those are racial undesirables. The bottom line is, and this is his statement, not mine, that we have a history of using the police power of the state to rid ourselves of undesirables. Later in the documentary, in segment 4, with an interview that I did with Sean Vestal, and by the way, all of these interviews are posted in their entirety. In the documentary, you only get to use snippets, unfortunately. We have the entire interviews posted on our website at leadshome.org. And Sean talked about how business owners here in the city have this desire or expectation that the police work for them. And if they have a problem with homeless people, the role of the police is to make that person not be there. And that does not work long term. And so what we tried to do is to bring in the perspectives of other people, attorneys, Sean's perspective as a journalist, looking at these suites and asking a very basic question. Do they work to accomplish the intent, which is to make those homeless people not be there? And the answer is no, they don't work. I believe the community court, Francis has been a friend since we served together on the leadership team, the Homeless Coalition. Love you, my brother. I believe the work of community court is outstanding, given the cards they've been dealt. My concern is a lot of those cards should never have been dealt in the first place. Now, I don't have a statistical study showing the rise of cases for third-degree possession of stolen property or second-degree trespassing. In documentary work, I usually wind up with the end result, and that is people who come to me with a citation saying, I just got this for having a piece of cardboard on the sidewalk that I was sitting on, and they cited me for interfering with pedestrian traffic. Or the young woman who came to me because she had just been cited, she stopped to film a police sweep, and she was cited for criminal traffic obstruction. 24 hours after the citation, she lost her job as a nurse because her citation hit the system, her employer saw it, and she was fired. And then I worked to help get her an attorney, and Lyria and Smith Barbieri did a wonderful job of helping her get legal representation to fight the ticket. But the bottom line is these are things that should not be happening in the first place. And unfortunately, we have to play the ball where it lies, as they say in golf. So I could yammer on about this for some time. I wind up filming and then dealing with the people that I film, and I get personally involved in trying to help them find attorneys and resolve things. I see it at the grassroots level, and that's where I go. Broken shalom is the way things ought not to be. Genuine shalom is the way things ought to be. And I think we can all look at situations like that and simply say, that's a situation that ought not to be in the first place. How do we change that? And that's what I try to do with documentary work.
Thank you so much. We're down to our last 7 minutes, and I can tell you we have way more questions than that. We have so many questions, and they're great questions, and I could do this all day, but I know that we're coming to the end of our time. And so what we're going to do is we'll make sure, because everyone that's here registered, so we have your emails, and we'll make sure and get those questions to our panelists so that we can get you some really good answers and get that back to you. Also, some of the questions are regarding Ben Stuckart's specific information that he gave. And so we'll make sure and get that specific information to everyone here so that they, in case you missed it, we'll get that information out to everyone as well, so you have that. I really want to thank everyone that has made this meeting a tremendous success. So now we would like to encourage you to act based on what we have presented today. So we're going to go ahead and show you how you can take action, where you can go to take action. So we're going to post all of the links that we show you here on our slides in the chat, so you have that. And then of course, we'll do a follow-up with our questions and all of this information after the meeting. So you can use your local league website and check out our committee actions and links. And this would be the link for that website for the League of Women Voters, where you can find your affordable housing and homelessness solutions, actions. We hope you will take this opportunity to contact your local representatives. Like Ben was really stressing, follow up with them and let them know that you care. Whether you live in a city, county, or another municipality, every city in our area affects the homeless community by how they provide support or by lack of support. Next, you can go to our state league site. On our state league site, you'll be able to see how the state league is tracking legislative issues on this and get more information on that. So now I'd like to thank, I believe that's the last slide. Yes, I would like to thank our panelists and all of our participants. And I'd really like to thank our Homelessness and Affordable Housing Committee members. Don Schuster's the chair, Jennifer Calvert, Marilyn Derelick, Becky Dickerhuth, Sherry Gangitano, and then me. I've been your moderator today. And these are some of the most dedicated, heartfelt people I think I've worked with. And I feel so privileged to work with this committee. We meet the first Sunday of every month at 3 p.m. And there's Dawn's information is on that slide. And we will, if you want to join our committee, because they're doing some amazing work, please reach out to Dawn and come join us and help us continue with all of the work that we're doing regarding this. So, and you can also, so the email is info@LWV@Spokane.org. So that's where you can reach out about if you're interested. So these are our upcoming events. We'd just like to make sure people know that our 102nd birthday for the league is coming up February on Valentine's Day. So it's a good reason to celebrate Valentine's Day as our the league's birthday. We have our board meeting coming up, President's Day, information on redistricting. We're going to actually have a Let's Chat birthday party. So if you'd like to join that, all of this information can be found on the League of Women Voters Spokane website. If you go there, there's a calendar. Our next general meeting will be March 8th, and it will be about teaching civics. So that would be an excellent chance to continue your work to advocate. And then our meeting after that on April 12th is for the environmental and regenerative. And that is okay. And then the last but not least, I just like to make sure you know that the recording is going to be available by tomorrow. And so if you missed this or you want to share it with anybody, you'll be able to do that as of tomorrow when the recording is put up onto our website. And with that, I'd like to welcome everybody to stay on for a little bit. We're pretty close to time here. If you have to go, that's great. If you'd like to stay on and ask any of our homelessness committee extra questions or just chat with them, please feel free to stay on for a little bit.